Hey, what's up guys? JG Physio Coach back with you once again, and today we're going to go through a bear crawl. I was asked a question about what is it exactly that we use the bear crawl for? What are you working on? And the fact of the matter is that there's a multitude of factors that elements that you're working on in the bear crawl. That's why I like this exercise so much, because it's one of those really good bang for your buck exercises. You tick a lot of boxes with this. You work on a lot of things which are useful for rehab and performance at the same time. There's a couple of different variations of it, and that's what we're going to go through today. So first thing with the bear crawl is let's talk core. It's a great core exercise, and I think it's often probably not considered one by most people compared to what we normally, I suppose, consider as being standard core exercise like the plank and stuff like that. But if you think about it, there's a couple of different sort of parts of the core it's working, and I think a good way of thinking about that is if your core wasn't doing anything, what positions would you end up in? And because of the position we're here on this bear crawl, if our core wasn't to do anything, our back would drop into this overarch position, much the same as if you were doing a plank. Gravity would force your back into an arched or an overextended position. But the other element that comes in here that you don't get with a standard plank is because we're alternating our arms. So there is at any given point, I'm taking out my base of support. I'm taking out an arm and a leg either side as I walk through. What your core has to then work on is this rotary stability, this kind of anti-rotation. So your obliques have to kick in to prevent a drop to that side that you're not supporting. So two elements: anti-extension, anterior core engagement, and anti-rotational rotary stability, two of the core elements that you're working on in the bear crawl. So next part, let's talk shoulders. Really important this. So with the two variations, let's make the distinctions between kind of what we're working on and how that kind of changes depending on the arm position. So first one, the overhead bear crawl. Now, if any of you have seen my videos that I've done on like some of the overhead kettlebell carries and stuff like that, you'll know probably what I'm referring to, what I'm talking about. In both the scapulas have to upwardly rotate, and there's three muscles that do that, namely your serratus anterior, lower traps, and to a certain extent your upper traps as well. Now, when we do the weighted carry exercise, supporting a weight overhead like that, those muscles have to switch on isometrically. So that isometric just means they're contracting without changing length, without lengthening or shortening, to support us in that position, to stop our scapula from tipping downwards, from downwardly rotating. And that's no different, when you're in this position here. If you can see me, when we're in this position, part of what those muscles are doing is the same thing as if you're just carrying a weight overhead, be it a kettlebell, barbell, or whatever. So we're engaging those absolutely crucial, essential scapular upward rotators in an isometric position, which is a really good prep, because a lot of times we use this in our gyms, in our classes, as a bit of a warm-up prep if any kind of vertical press movement is coming up. Now, in the other bear crawl, we're in more of a kind of horizontal press position. It's the same thing, but maybe the emphasis changes to a certain extent. We're now not in the sort of elevated overhead position, but what we are getting is, again, if we go back to like what we said with the core, what would happen to our shoulders if the muscles weren't to work? Well, we'd slip into this position, as in our shoulder blades would pinch back behind us, they would retract, and one of the main muscles we're working here, one of those scapular protractors, is your serratus anterior, a really important shoulder blade stabilizing muscle, and we're engaging that again in a sort of isometric position, isometric contraction, as you're walking through your bear crawl in that fashion. So a lot of those scapular muscles are really fired up during both of these bear crawl variations to great effect. This is also a great exercise, I think, for learning how to kind of dissociate movement at joints. And what I'm talking about here is that
the bear crawl, and probably the more horizontal one we're talking about here, is useful for training that awareness of how to move your hip without moving your back. So there's a lot of different cues to this. You know, imagine like you've got a glass balance on your lower back, or imagine you've got a ball balance on your lower back, and you know, you're basically trying to prevent it from falling off. It's trying to encourage you to keep your back in a stable, kind of neutral position. So what we're talking about is when you're like this. When you're like this. Anyway, you're moving the hip without hopefully moving the back at the same time. So that's what I mean by dissociation, is moving the joint you want to move without moving all the other neighbouring joints at the same time. And you'd be surprised how many people are kind of oblivious to that kind of concept, and oblivious to the fact that maybe moving their back whilst moving their hips at the same time. And I think it's very common, the amount of people, sort of the general population that you have through the gym door, the level of body awareness is relatively low. So stuff like these kind of exercises, where you can kind of very easily integrate them into a warm-up and teach people how to dissociate joint movement, is really, really useful. So let's talk mobility then, and this is where really that sort of more overhead bear crawl comes into its own, I think, in terms of the mobility benefits it can provide. So shoulders, upper back, you're going to get a little bit of thoracic extension, T-spine mobility, obviously in your overhead position, so you're going to help, it helps to work on that full kind of overhead elevation range of motion. But what I particularly like about that is that rather than kind of just being a passive static hold in that position, you're actively engaging the musculature to help you arrive there. So all those kind of scapular upward rotators that we were talking about before, it's that control of the overhead range of motion, that active engagement. So it's as much stability overhead as it is mobility overhead, which I really like, because that's what's going to really set you up for success and safety when it comes on to whatever overhead movement you're doing in your workout or in your class. The other element is hip mobility. So, and hip flexion is what we're really talking about. So that looks like this. You see the legs are coming up towards the sort of torso and the arms there. Now, you get a really nice sort of stretch through your hammies, through the calves, if you're sort of pushing your heels down towards the floor as far as you can. And this is a good one, not just for the, for athletes themselves, but also for coaches, for any of you watching this. You can program this into your warm-ups to use as a bit of a screen to assess your client's sort of hip flexion, mobility, hamstring length, etc. And it can really help you get a head start on whether or not you'll need to modify any of the movements, or subsequent movements that you maybe have in your workout that are very hip flexion, mobility demanding, rather than arriving there and having to find out at the time and then have to modify kind of firefighting. So it's a really good useful exercise for that as well. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, please don't forget to subscribe and share on Facebook or Twitter. We can follow us at AthleteFix on Twitter, and the Facebook page is AthleteFix on there. So feel free to give us a share and all that stuff, and see you next time.